This is the Nasserman Hockey Podcast with James Nichols and John Zeller.
And welcome back to the Nasserman Hockey Podcast. James Nichols and John Zeller here as always. And joining us today is also Joe Pantorno of AM New York. What's up, guys? What's going on?
What's up? Doing well. Waiting out this storm and excited to start talking hockey again. It's been 2 very long weeks. I'm starting to have withdrawals.
Yeah, it's weird. No Islander games, but games nonetheless. But I'm doing all right as well.
Yeah, it's officially the off season for the Islanders. Not officially the off season for the NHL yet, as Montreal won in overtime last night or 2 nights ago. But that was exciting. We thought that the brooms might have come out, but they did not. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But before we get into anything else, let's get into On the Island, brought to you by DraftKings. McGregor vs. Poirier is all set for UFC 264 this weekend. Every punch, kick, and knockout means so much more with the DraftKings lineup on the line. DraftKings, the official daily fantasy partner of UFC, is giving you a shot at huge cash prizes. For this weekend's fight, DraftKings is offering all customers a shot at millions of dollars in total prizes. If you haven't tried it yet, fantasy MMA is easy to play. Just pick 6 fighters to stay under the salary cap, and pile up points for advances, takedowns, and more. It's the McGregor versus Poirier rubber match. Get in the action now. Download the DraftKings app and use promo code THPN for your shot at millions of dollars in total cash prizes throughout the week. That's promo code THPN to get a shot at millions of dollars in total prizes only at DraftKings. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for more details. All right, so a lot of things going to happen this offseason. We have the expansion draft coming up first. Then we have, the free agent re-signing period for restricted free agents and unrestricted free agents technically has begun. You can start doing that now internally within the teams. And then free agency kicks off in a few weeks. But let's talk about the expansion draft first. And a lot of chatter on what the Islanders are going to do. Who's going to be protected? Who's going to be left unprotected? Is it going to be Varlamov? Are they going to sign a goaltender just to protect him and leave him unprotected? A lot of different scenarios. John, let's go to you first. I want to know what you're thinking. Are you going 7-3-1? Are you going 8-1? And in that sort of structure, who are you protecting on your protection list?
So I want to start with a group, and then I kind of have an argument later when we get to different signings and other things like that. So I'll say this group, and there's a caveat, and I'll even put the caveat on the player. I'm 7-3-1. I have Pelech, Pulock, Mayfield. Leddy's exposed. I think we'll probably get into more of our arguments in a bit. So Dobson's exempt, which is good. So they kind of keeps them at 4 and trying to figure out that third pair. Offense, Barzal, Beauvillier, Nelson, Pajot, Eberle with an asterisk, Bailey and Lee. Obviously, Varlamov, Sorokin is exempt. I think there's some other players that you could also think about. And James, I know you have some other thoughts on that. So that's my 7-3-1. Not out of the box. This is not a crazy. I didn't do anything nuts.
Yeah, I mean, this is all. It seems pretty straightforward, and I'm with you on the defense. Pelech, Pulock, and Mayfield are my 3. Pelech and Pulock are no brainers. That's your number 1 pairing, and they're each making a case to be a number 1 defenseman. So both no brainers, and then you get to that third guy, and who's it going to be? Like you said, Dobson is exempt, so you don't need to protect him. And for me, it's an obvious choice that it's Scott Mayfield because one, he proved in the playoffs
over Leddy.
Over Nick Leddy, yes. He's the third guy that you protect. He proved in the playoffs that he's an impact on the ice, and he had maybe a little bit of a rough season, and Leddy had a really good regular season, but that team-friendly contract that he still possesses is just huge, and I don't think that's something that you can pass up when looking at the board and saying who's most valuable here for me to keep. The value sides with Mayfield because of that contract. And then once in a while you'll see him put up a snipe like he did over Vasilevsky to tie the game like that. So he's got a little bit of a sneaky offensive side to him. So Mayfield's the third guy for me on defense. Shifting to offense, it's pretty obvious. For 6 guys for me, it's Barzal, Lee, Beauvillier, Nelson, and Peugeot. My 6th guy is going to be Josh Bailey, and some of you might be ripping your hair out at that thought, but in my opinion, Josh Bailey deserves to finish his career as an Islander. He's been around since day one of his career. That was
exactly my thought. I don't know how this team, Lou doesn't do that.
Right, exactly. And
that's as long as he's the GM, that's not going to happen.
Right, and that's the thing with this team and the regime right now is, not only do they want players who want to be, in the system on the ice, but they want them to be in the system off of the ice too. And this roster is all about loyalty. And Josh Bailey's been nothing but loyal to this team. So, it wouldn't surprise me to see one day his number hanging up in the rafters at some point. And he's going to finish his career as an Islander. So he does get the 6th spot for me. Now, the 7th spot, it's tough for me to pinpoint one guy because, yes, you can, expose Eberle because for me, it's an easy transition from, okay, if we expose Eberle and Seattle takes Eberle, that opens the door for Kyle Palmieri to come back because he's already said that he wants to. And if he comes back for a few less dollars than what Eberle is making, depending on what the lineup looks like next year, whether he's on the first, second, or third line, again, we've said a million times, this roster or this top 12, if you will, is really, they all play even minutes.
Well, let's let Joe, because we can each dive into why we chose certain players. So we want to do that now? Okay, yeah. Let Joe do his thing because we may either have the same thought or opposing things. So
let me just finish up with who I'm protecting in net, and that's obviously Semyon Varlamov. It's really not a question. A lot of people are calling for him to be unprotected. It's not going to happen. Lamoriello loves to establish a net, and Varlamov was the Islanders' best player all season. It's not happening. He's going to be back. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a couple of school of thoughts here, and I think it's important to kind of separate the wishful thinking from what everybody wants to see and ultimately who's pulling the strings. And ultimately who's pulling the strings is Lou Lamoriello. And going from track record, which is the only thing that I can go from, is Lou Lamoriello likes to play things rather conservatively, where you're not going to see too much rocking of the boat. So
yeah, I
believe, at least just from a professional standpoint, I'm on the same page as both of you guys. The 7-3-1, it's Barzal, Lee, Beauvillier, Nelson, Pajot, Bailey, Eberle. Defense is Pelech, Pulak, and Mayfield. Goalie is Varlamov. And again, to me, I think the name of the game right now is just shedding that salary. You have an opportunity to float a guy like Nick Leddy, who's making $5.5 million next year. Get him off the books, and you're fine. And I think that's where, how you mentioned Jordan Eberle, same thing. And those who want to see Semyon Varlamov out there, same thing. Those are sizable chunks of change that could come off the books. And the more you see of that, of those three out there, the more likelihood that Seattle's going to take the bait and grab one of those guys. So, I think a lot of us want to see the Islanders put all those big money guys out there. So ultimately it gives them the flexibility to take on, those last pieces that everybody wishes the Islanders will go out and get. But again, you have to consider it's Lou Lamoriello here. And again, we'll get into it later, but I won't expect anarchy as much as I think we'd like to see it.
Now, I think my reasoning for floating Leddy is that it's like you said, Joe, the $5.5 million. So it gives you an opportunity to pay everybody fairly, and you may be able to bring Palmieri back. In which case, you have Lee back, and that's a pretty deep roster. And then what I also think about Leddy, considering, and I wrote that piece and you guys saw it'll be out in the next couple of days. My reason for Leddy is that it might keep the cost down for Lamoriello, or he might be able to package something on top of it, as far as like throwing a lad contract with Leddy and a lower pick, and that's a cheaper package than a Bellows and a higher pick and something else to make sure that happens, right? It keeps that cost down. If you bring Green back, who's already on your books for next year, whether he plays for the Islanders or not, because of the way his bonuses were structured in a 35-plus contract, he's on the books anyway. So you bring him back at league min, at least you get something out of him. You have your top 4 plus Green. You're only filling maybe 1.5 spots on D. And you still do have Hickey around. I'm not going to, obviously he's not a valued member of this franchise at this point, so I can't keep harping on it. I was wrong. But it's still, he's around, but you still got Bolduc, you still have Wild, and you still have, there's the other one, Robin Salo.
Right.
So there are options that, now that Dobson's more established, you can give up a Letty who, I don't know, his best offensive season in 3 years. He's won a cup. He's still pretty young. He's also not going to be on this team after this year anyway for the Islanders.
You're probably right. Yeah, you're probably
right. This is last year of the contract. So when I was digging into this article a little bit, that I just stumbled upon that and kind of came to that conclusion where Eberle was signed. He plays well next to Barzal. Lee comes back. That's a really strong line. That offensive group's if you can get Beauvillier back at a decent price at COVID prices, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I totally agree. And here's the thing, circling back to, who my 7th guy is to protect. I don't really have a pinpoint on who that might be. Because like I said earlier, you can leave Eberle unprotected, and there is that possibility that he gets taken. Now, who does that mean, gets protected? Joe, I see in our notes here that, even you said, I think they should protect Bellows, correct?
It's a strong option. And I think the one thing you have to realize, though, where again, I think a lot of people want to see Bellows protected because there is the young offensive upside with him. Where does he rank on Barry Trotz's trust chart?
Right. And that's the thing, right? It's a matter of if they think he's ready to take that next step. It's similar to last season with Noah Dobson, right? We only let go of Devin Taves because we knew Noah Dobson was ready. Do they know that Kiefer Bellows is ready? I don't know that they are going to know that, but maybe, listen, what Noah Dobson last season played 34 games. He didn't have a full season. So maybe they see something in Bellows that they think maybe he's ready to take that next step. He's making a rookie contract, or is he due for a contract right now? He might be due for one.
He might be an RFA.
I think he's an RFA, but either way, he's not going to make more than, say $1 million per year, which I doubt he even gets that much. So he comes in at a low cost. So Bellows, or might I say Koivula, could be that 7th guy who they protect, kind of forcing the hand of Seattle if they favor one of those young guys at those young contracts. Now they have less options to choose from, and they might have to take an Eberle or a Letty. So it's really
I think there's a deal. I think Lamoriello is going to make. I don't think there's a who could they take. I don't think Lou operates like that. I think it's going to be pretty strategic where I
think you're right.
He's making that deal ahead of time or has already done it and said, this is, what, and, here's a good player, but here's what we need to do with it. And I know we're going to talk about Staples' article in depth a little bit more, but I think that's getting rid of that lad contract plus a Letty or an Eberle or whatever is the key here. Because if you want to bring Palmieri back, and essentially that's replacing Eberle. If Eberle is gone and you're keeping Palmieri, they're about even. They're down to weight, height, everything, goals in the last few seasons. They're really even. I don't think Kyle got enough of a shot to know whether or not it would work or not with Barzal. But I think they. Or
you could argue, you could argue that it worked so well in the minimal amount of time they had together that it's what would happen if they got more time together?
Yeah, and I think the one thing I think that's different is that Palmieri is a little bit better of a sniper than Eberle. I think he has a little bit more of that. Yeah, that edge,
and I think he's a little more consistent than Eberle.
And I think he's more consistent. And I didn't dive that deep into both of them, but they've both been big parts of Islanders runs the last few years.
Yeah.
So it's not. I don't think it's like a clean swap, but I think it's as close as you're ever going to get. So it's if they give up Letty, I can see them both coming back.
Yeah,
but if you really do want Palmieri to come back, you got to think Eberle's going. I don't think Beauvillier is the guy that they're just going to simply, expose because he's going to be too expensive or something like that. Like his upside is more than what's going to remaining on Eberle's contract.
Yeah,
there's no way that you keep one over the other in that particular situation. Like that can't be an argument.
And this only makes sense if Palmieri comes back at less dollars than what one of the outgoing guys comes in at, right? So you could see something like maybe a $4.5 million thing coming back. If a couple of guys take contracts for a little less than what they're worth, that $500,000 here, that $500,000 there, you're talking about $3-4 million now in wiggle room. So it's
and if Vlad goes and they again that Staple article pitches Komarov out to wherever, Edmonton or something. If there are these little deals to be made and you can get what is that, $8 million? Komarov makes 3.5 or something. Like, yeah, that's
it's a big
that's
deal.
Game-changing money for this. And this team knows it wants to win. Like the players, I'm not talking about like the management, the coaches, like the players know that they're real close. So I think they're willing, like look at Barzal. He took a little bit of a bridge deal. Yeah. I suspect we'll see more of that from these guys outside of Pelech. I think he'll get a little bit more term.
Yeah.
I think Cizikas will get a little bit more term. We'll get to him in a second. But yeah, I honestly think Lamoriello's guy, the expansion draft, figured it out.
I think you're right.
And he should. And I think it's important. And it was a completely different regime, but I think Islanders fans should expect something along the lines of what happened in 2017 when Vegas came into the league. Because
I think so.
If you remember, this is a team that at the time they left, and their opinions on these players were much different at the time. But Ryan Strome was exposed, Calvin DeHaan was exposed, and most importantly, Brock Nelson was exposed.
Yeah.
So they had to do some wheeling and dealing just to make sure that neither of those three guys were selected. It was the contract of Grabowski and Berube.
Yeah. I think he was the selection.
Yeah, some picks. Exactly. So you could see the Islanders doing something along the lines of that, where if they really want to hang on to Bellows, if they really want to hang on to Koivula, you know what? Maybe they'll call him up and say, "Hey, we'll give you a Letty and Eberle plus."
Well, it could be, Letty and one of the RFA minor league players like that needs a new contract, but here are the rights. Sure. I think there's like a week in between the expansion draft and free agency. So, they have some time to do that. Or they just don't do anything and they, whatever the case is. So I think you're probably right, Joe. There's going to be some, and Lamoriello is just the guy, like he's going to wheel and deal. He's going to figure it out.
And that's the comforting thing I think a lot of Islanders fans can take out of this, where under normal circumstances or a normal off season, all of these avenues would not be open for the Islanders to shed as much cap as it would. Because I think teams around the league understand that the Islanders are desperate to shed that cap, and they would be encountered with a king's ransom wherever they went. Seattle provides that much of a difference, where at least it's another opportunity that they could possibly pursue to shed a lot of that cap, to get some of those big contracts off the books. Again, you got to see how willing they are to take the bait. It's not like they're coming in blind here. They understand what's going on too. So,
Lou's made deals that were good for both sides, or at least it accomplished a goal of both sides.
Absolutely.
I think the Devon Taves thing is a perfect example. You cannot like that. I still don't like that, but it did what the Islanders needed to do.
Yeah.
So it accomplished Lou's goal, even if it was hard to swallow. And Colorado also got their nut. So you can make two people happy, I think, in these situations, even if up front it doesn't look good.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I saw something on Twitter the other day, where everything is always true and happy, but this funny feeling that I believe it was a Leafs beat writer laughing at the fact that Lou Lamoriello has now won 2 consecutive back-to-back GM of the Year awards after giving up someone like Devon Taves. And the fact that they were eliminated, and it was a joke that the GM of the Lightning wasn't, GM of the year back-to-back years because they're about to win their second consecutive Stanley Cup. But I
think it's about overachieving, and that's every NHL award
thing.
For the most part, whether it's GMs, coaches, or
right.
Jack Adams is the same way.
I think the point of him winning GM of the year was that he moved a top 4 defenseman in Devin Taves to the Avalanche to essentially make sure he can re-sign Matthew Barzal and Ryan Pulock. And despite doing that, they were back where they were last year and actually got closer. And I know
they added Andy Green,
right,
and replaced Devin Taves,
right,
with
and I know
Andy
that they don't
Green.
I know they don't take the playoffs into consideration, but I really wonder how much those writers don't actually take playoffs into consideration, because again, they got back where they were for the second straight year. They got into the playoffs for the second straight year, and they were essentially in the same spot they were last season, and got that much closer. So, I understand that it might be easy to point at the Islanders and Lou Lamoriello and say this guy won GM of the year. Well, yeah, he won GM of the year because he kept the core intact, and he got them back to where they were supposed to be. So. I don't think it's
strategic.
That, right,
it doesn't look pretty, but it's strategic and it worked.
And he replaced Anders Lee plus at the trade deadline with Palmieri and Zajac. So it's not like he was sitting on his hands doing nothing and he just got it because of who he is. He worked hard to make sure the team stayed together for the most part, and whenever they needed something, he got it for them. So
it's funny too, and like I especially as a podcast, because we record our thoughts and literally present them to people. But I think it'll be interesting for us to look back on, like, this is right before in consecutive weeks throughout July, very big things will happen and the team will change. Like we will see it long, not even free agency, which I think is the last thing, right? Am I making that up?
Yes.
So, but even well before free agency, there's going to be a little bit of chaos.
Yeah.
Not, somewhat Islanders control, not anarchy like Joe's referring to, as far as like maybe some positive things coming back the Islanders' way. But I think there's going to be a lot of changes. And I think it's important for us to like look back on what we thought was a good deal or a tough thing or whatever. And halfway through the season, reflect on that, or at the beginning of the season when you're watching them play, reflect on that.
Yeah.
Because losing Devon Taves was terrible. That was not good, right?
Yeah,
on the surface, that's not good. But now looking back on it, you're like, okay, maybe, would they have been better with him? Yeah, of course. But you need, like you said, Barzal, Pulock. Now, if you tie up too much money with Taves, even if you were able to get him in, does that tie your hands for this year's problem?
Right. And I was going to say that, right? Like if you sign Taves to a 4x5, might not have an Adam Pelech. So,
and or a Mayfield who,
right,
as the playoffs went on, kind of solidified himself a little more. And like, and as we talk about this, and you want to give up Nick Leddy, and he may be out the door anyway after this season as a UFA, or they trade him at the deadline and flip him for someone with term or whatever the case is. I do have a question of who ultimately replaces them. I know you were big on Robin Salo, and he's poised to do it. I think that's good if you're going to split time with an Andy Green to give him some rest. There's still a slot open, and I honestly don't know. There's a UFA question out there that if you let Nick Leddy go, you bring Palmieri back, and you're and Cizikas, right? He takes a longer deal, whatever. And I suppose we're going to get into that in a second. Your forward group is set probably for some time. Like it's just not going to change for a while. And you have to get rid of Ladd too. However, he's going to do that. Shoot him in the sun. Have him shoot himself in the sun. He's made enough money not playing for the Islanders. Or he might retire, which what I was trying to do, and Joe, you may know this or be better at researching it than I did. Cap or capture. That's what I was worried about, is if he retires, the Ladd retires, what does it do to the Islanders? Like for the against the cap. Like it's obviously not his full contract, but it's not nothing. Like I think something still counts. Or if they mutually agree to terminate.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, if he retires, he leaves on the table what he's owed.
I don't know exactly how that, because it was because of his age or something like that. Maybe it doesn't apply, and maybe that's why I couldn't do it.
It could be something along the lines of what happened with Johnny Boychuk, where he retired, but they just put him on LTIR.
Right.
I'm sure there's a way to
Right. That's
kind of
another
make that happen.
table. But listen, given the way Andrew Ladd has spoken over the last few months, over the last year, he still thinks he has something left in the tank. So I don't think he's going to be going quietly into the night anytime soon. So
they can mutually agree to terminate if he still thinks he can get picked up and kind of work his way up from wherever he thinks.
And that's
also fine.
That's a substantial bet on himself should that happen. I don't think there's going to be a lot of takers. But you know what? There might be teams towards the bottom of the standings who are looking for some veteran depth or potential leadership to kind of oversee a younger roster. But again, those are, that's a lot of ifs and buts or whatever you want to call it. So it's still the albatross that's looming over the Islanders' heads right now, and it's going to be a major storyline this summer.
So that forward group is solidified. I worry about what money is left over then for that. Let's call it the 4th or 5th slot on D. That I don't know. Like that, I don't know if there's a UFA out there that people are talking about. I don't know that they give that much trust to 2 rookies plus Dobson, really, who was sheltered heavily in these playoffs. Like, I honestly, and obviously it's not Hickey, like I said. Maybe it's Aho, who's at least been around the team. That's my question, and that's why I wanted. Leddy makes a whole lot of sense to let go, but that's why I put the caveat on Eberle. It may just be the swap with Palmieri, like bringing him back. Mm-hmm. You can't bring them both back. You can only bring one. Keep Leddy, and then you have your, maybe you can still split time with Salo and Green. If that's really what you wanted to do as your 7th defenseman or something. I don't know how else you do it. Like I don't see one of those 2 plus Ladd has to go unless they can magically also get rid of Komarov, which I also have a hard time believing as much as I'd like to see it happen.
Unless you do what we'll be talking about later, you pseudo blow it up in terms of, leaving Eberle exposed, leaving Leddy exposed, or one of them and trading the other one for a top line scorer or a depth defenseman or both.
Right. Well, let's get into the internal UFAs.
RFAs first. Let's talk about
UFA. Sorry.
The guys who were said by Lamoriello who are likely to or definitely coming back. He made it pretty clear in a press conference the other day that we're not going to have a Devin Taves 2.0 this offseason. So all of Sorokin, Beauvillier, and Pelech were said to be coming back to the team. And I guess let's dive into a little bit, Joe. Let me ask you. You look at Ilya Sorokin, what he did this season. He played under a $2 million contract on a 1-year deal. What's his next contract look like?
You would assume that the Islanders are going to want to secure him for the future, long term. I don't know, again, if the financial parameters are going to allow them to do that. You could see another potential bridge deal happen. I don't know how happy that'll make him. After all, he's 25 years old. It's not that he's a complete youngster. He's not a spring chicken. He's got some wear and tear. He played a lot in Russia, and he showed, at least early on, that he can be that guy here for the Islanders. So I would think that Sorokin's management should be coming with the terms of at least a 5-year deal plus. And in terms of AAV, who knows? He could be asking for something like a 5x5. It's I don't know. It's tough. Actually, I reached out to his agent last week. No reply. Still waiting. But it's, to me at least, I think there's a pecking order in terms of priority of what you want the Islanders to address, and I think Sorokin is number one because
over Pelech.
He is undoubtedly your goaltender, your franchise goaltender of the future. It is something that the franchise has not had for decades, or at least has shown that it could potentially work out for them. You think you had it in Rick DiPietro, it didn't happen. Sorokin is that hope finally returned. And now you obviously have management that won't bungle it in terms of an unreasonable contract.
Well,
I would say
there are some questionable ones.
for
Lou.
sure. For sure. And
But
I think Sorokin is 1 and Pelech is 1A.
Okay.
Undoubtedly your number one defenseman. He's one of the best defensemen in the league. He will be up for Norris consideration sooner rather than later, rather than getting 1 or 2 fifth place votes here and there.
Yeah.
And then I think Beauvillier is a step down. He is the obvious number 2, if you want to call that, behind the 1 and the 1A. So, I think a long-term deal should be in the cards for Ilya Sorokin. I would like to think that it is deserved. You got to put your eggs in the basket, considering how much you invested in him, how much you waited for him. I would say you start with a 4 or 5 year deal and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's 100% the way they have to go because, after this season, he's due for UFA status. So right then and there, you don't want him to get to unrestricted free agency to get a taste of what's out there. Imagine being Edmonton and seeing that Ilya Sorokin was going to UFA. They would be licking their chops prepared with a 7-year, I don't know, $50 million deal, upwards of that. So that's definitely something you need to lock up long term. And it's interesting because a lot of these contracts coming up, because of cap restrictions, might have more term than dollars to make up for the lack of dollars. The something that especially for the Islander players nowadays, that's more important to players is security. And having the term is a sense of security. So, you might see longer term deals. And that's something I could see for next up, Anthony Beauvillier as well. I believe he's 2 seasons removed from unrestricted free agency. So if they really wanted to, they could do another bridge deal. But for Beauvillier, I don't see why they can't do something like a 6-year deal. And maybe he makes, just $4 million.
They can keep the AAV down if there's more term. I think that's what they'll do with Sorokin.
Yeah,
as well. And we'll talk about UFAs in a second. Cizikas, I think that's kind of what needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of Anthony Beauvillier, consistent, he would have scored 20 goals this year. He's consistently in that 18 to 20 range, 45 points. Still only 24. It's possible he could hit that 25, 50 point, 60 point range at some point. He's coming into his prime. So his best years are ahead of him.
If you can get him on a 5-year deal,
that would be great.
Until his late 20s or something, that'd be huge.
That'd be
perfect.
Yeah, you really want to make you want to try and get these guys past when they're supposed to start their unrestricted free agency. And I think that, as a top 6 player on this team, and he knows that, you don't want him to get to unrestricted free agency to really leverage you. No, who knows what the cap's going to look like in 2 years? Nobody knows. This season coming up, it's probably not going up anywhere. I heard whispers, maybe $1 million. So maybe they get a little bit of wiggle room that might help them, but nothing substantial where they could essentially sign another superstar in unrestricted free agency. So I could see something like a 4 or 5 year deal for Anthony Beauvillier, but the most polarizing contract for the Islanders this offseason is probably going to be Adam Pelech. He's your bona fide number 1 defenseman. Like Joe said before, he's going to get Norris candidate, votes up the wazoo, come the next couple of seasons. He's really made himself known nationally at this point. Not too many people don't know who Adam Pelech is anymore. John, I'll start with you. What does that contract look like?
I have no idea. I don't know what these numbers look like because they're as it stands not very far under the cap, at the moment, right? So I have no idea. He probably gets the biggest bag of cash out of all of them. Oh, I mean, I guess I'm differing from Joe. I really, Varlamov's locked up. Obviously, Sorokin's going to be around. I don't think any of these are a real issue. He might get the most money, or really close to Sorokin. I think the two of them are together. I don't know. I hope it's a long-term deal. I don't want it to be that in 3 years we need to reevaluate this when the cap goes back up. I kind of want some of them to have a year or two left over beyond that. So maybe again another 4 or 5 year deal. How old is Pelech? I don't even know.
26.
26. Yeah, so a 4 or 5 year deal. Kind of evaluate it when he gets to that 30 mark, as they have with a lot of their defensemen. Letty's kind of in that same boat where he's 30, 31 years old. They're trying to figure out what the next steps are for him maybe after this year. I have no idea. What was Pelech got a bridge deal, right?
Yeah,
Pulak got a bridge deal.
Yeah, Pelech's deal that is now running out was one of the biggest bargains in the league, where it was a 4 year, something like 4 years, $6.4 million. I mean,
yeah, I think he was only making like $1.5 million a year.
Yeah. So it's tough with Pelech, because obviously his representation is going to understand and see the potential in terms of this is now a guy that is entering the conversation as one of the top blue liners in the NHL. And if you look at the average annual values of some of the top D men in the NHL, not even in terms of how good they are as defensive defensemen, just in terms of name value, I mean, some of these average values are something that is going to provide pause for a lot of Islanders fans, where there will be some worry. Obviously, they're not going to come at the Islanders with Erik Karlsson demands, right? Where they want $11.5 million, or same thing with like Drew Doughty. That's not going to happen. But if you kind of go down to that next tier of defensemen where, all right, Chris Letang is making $7.2 million a year. Aaron Ekblad is making $7.5 million a year. Victor Hedman is making $7.8 million. So I think Pelech is going to get probably a step down or something in between where...
Well, Pulak's making $5 for reference. So it's got to be...
I would say
5.5 would be like a lot.
I would say it's somewhere between 5 and 6.
So the consensus is that he definitely makes more than Ryan Pulak.
I don't know that. I think 5.5 would be. I would argue it'd be more of the same. I mean, I both say 5
in terms of, I guess, keeping the peace, even if they do keep track of this, and professional athletes will say that they won't, but what happens behind closed doors, who knows?
Yeah.
If Pulak is making 5 and Pelech makes 5.5, and there's your first line D pairs, well, who knows what that's going to do? So I don't know. I mean, ideally, I think in a perfect world, the Islanders would like to keep Pelech's potential new contract as close as possible to Pulak's. But again, I mean, this is somebody who is really kind of rounding into form here, entering his prime, and I think we know how much of a premium is now being put on number one defensemen, and especially looking around the league, how much better I think teams would be with a guy like Adam Pelech. So
I think 5.5.
Sure.
I don't know the term. I'd imagine 30, 31-year-old season. So 5 years, something around that mark. It wouldn't be crazy. It kind of locks that number in at a low mark before the cap goes back up, which I think is obviously part of Lamoriello's goal.
Is a 7 or 8 year deal out of the question for him as your number one defenseman?
It should not. It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
No.
So what is he, 33 at the end of that? I guess that's not terrible. He's not going to get better after 30. So that's my problem is, and if Pelech and Pulak, granted, if they win the Islanders a cup in the next 5 years, no one's going to care what happens. Look at how long it took for Chicago for them to really care about all these guys and talk about trading Duncan Keith and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
Where they were really hurting. So if they bring a cup back, Long Island's going to forget they're going to forget a number of seasons after that, frankly. They're going to be not sober for some time.
Well, it's interesting that you say that he's not going to get better after 30, though, because someone I think of who plays a similar style, but he's much bigger, is Zdeno Chara. He got better after 30. So, I mean, you never know.
I wouldn't bank on, Chara did it, who's an absolute
No, I'm not
freak.
banking on it. I'm just saying it's just something that you just never know.
Impossible, but it's very super not likely to happen. So, having said that, if Pelech and Pulak are your third pairing and they're both 33, 34 years old, that's okay. I don't want them to be your first pair still, unless they're absolutely killing it. Maybe their second pair. But yeah, I think that's where you have to we're talking half a decade in advance here. So it's you can't editorialize that. I mean,
Right.
you can, you shouldn't.
Right.
That's just kind of ridiculous. You can only think really 2-3 years in advance. Injuries, who knows what can happen.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. But let's move to the unrestricted free agent that everyone keeps talking about, and I know that there was some nervousness surrounding Islanders Twitter the other day because of the fact that Casey Cizikas sold his house, and everybody just needs to calm down a minute because, first of all, if memory serves me correct, I believe it was up for sale a while ago, and his family's expanding. He's just had a kid not too long ago, and maybe he just wants to look for something bigger and better. You never know. So I don't think that him selling his house has anything to do with what's happening in the forecast. Now, I've been on the record to say that with the Matt Martin 4-year deal, I seriously doubt there's not a plan in place to make sure that Casey Cizikas was not going to come back as well. So Casey Cizikas is going into unrestricted free agency, and in my opinion, you have to bring him back. I guess we'll talk about if you have to bring him back or if you don't. I'm going to start by saying you have to bring him back. And like we said earlier, these longer term deals could be what's on the table right now because of the cap crunch and the security in having that long-term deal making X amount of dollars might be comfortable or comforting to a player, knowing especially if they want to stay. And we all know Casey Cizikas is an Islander at heart. And maybe he wants to stay on Long Island, or he probably does want to stay on Long Island. His best friend plays here on the same line as him, and he's literally made an identity out of who he is on the identity line. So I'm not too sure he's licking his chops at free agency. Matt Martin might have something to say about that, going to the Leafs and coming back and saying it's not worth it. So
this is a team so close,
right? So close.
I don't know that you leave. And sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So again, I could see something like him getting 6 years at a low AAV at like $2.5 million, and Matt Martin saying to him, "Do what I did."
Yeah, I wonder how long the contract is. That I don't know. I think eventually this fourth line will not be so quote overpaid in the future. So Casey comes back at 2.5, Martin's at 1.5. This is Cal Clutterbuck's last season too on his deal. He will eventually get a pay cut, and if he's going to stick around on this team, although I think injuries will catch up with him in the nearer future. But I think that line stays together much cheaper. So next off season, it's one less thing to worry about. So you can, if you're Lou Lamoriello and you're like, okay, we're going to be really tight this year. We may not have flexibility at the trade deadline, this and that. We are going to gain maybe $2.5 million next off season on top of other players leave. I think Komarov this last season.
Komarov comes off the books. Ross Johnston comes off the books.
So you could be, $10 million clear next season at the end of next season. So if you can make another contender out of a group here and right, make it work, you could. And if you're willing to maybe go through the season with some rookie defensemen and figure it out and maybe get a really cheap, another leagueman or $1.5 million defenseman that's a veteran that can, kind of just plug the hole. Maybe gets Robin Salo in the mix, keep Andy Green around, whatever you want to do, give Dobson a little bit more. You could make another good run at it. At least get to the second round again. I don't think that that's unreasonable for next season as far as marking that a success. As long as they play well in the second round, get to game 6 or 7, sure, I can be happy with that, knowing that the team can actually make some serious moves and be one of the rare teams with some cap space in, COVID cap era. So yeah, if they can get Cizikas if you can get him at 2, that really helps, but 2.5, something like that with some term. He's 30. So I wonder how long you can really keep him beyond Martin, or, you got to think, all right, how long can Martin really keep it up? how long can Cal Clutterbuck really keep it up? So is that
4
more years? Like, I wouldn't keep them. I wouldn't say like, okay, he's part of this identity line for another 5 years or 6 years. He could be on the fourth line at 35. That's not a problem, but his line mates will be different.
That's
at
true.
the end of that contract, it'll look different. So as long as they're prepared for that, which knowing what I do about Lamoriello, it's probably fine. Just you have to know that's going to look different in 5 years from now.
I'm sure he knows that, and I think what's important here before I know Joe's ready to let out what he's thinking, but I think it's also important here for everyone, who's nervous about this offseason coming up to keep in mind that these are going to be overpayments. There's going to be overpayments because they have to be overpayments. If you want to keep a guy like Casey Cizikas, and I'm sure he wants to stay, and the team wants him back, and because they're so close knit, these contracts are going to be overpayments, whether it's term or whether it's dollars. So you're going to have to give up one to get the other, and in that sense, it's going to be an overpayment. And if you get 4 good years out of 6 on a 6-year deal for Cizikas, that's a win in my book. But Joe, what are your thoughts?
I think we're kind of seeing a pseudo revolution in the NHL, and I think the Islanders have something to do with it in terms of the fact that this mythical idea of 4-line hockey that teams have preached over the eons is finally coming to fruition on Long Island, where the Islanders have proven to the NHL that, again, you don't need to have the strongest offensive roster on paper. You don't need to have a bona fide top-tier elite scorer within your ranks. And you can still be successful. You can still get to within a game of the Stanley Cup. And if a bounce goes here and a bounce goes there, who knows what happens after that. That being said, I think there's going to be plenty of interest in Casey Cizikas because of that, where he is the poster child of that 4-line hockey, that depth, that high energy, frenetic hockey that I think a lot of teams are going to start looking for. Where, again, you look across town, the Rangers tried to build a contender on finesse and skill alone. That was quickly disproven, where the front office was blown up, the head coach was fired, and they're going in a completely different direction. So in that aspect, I think that because of Casey Cizikas' style, there's going to be
a big market,
pretty sizable interest in a guy that hasn't scored 10 goals in the last 2 seasons.
Right.
That being said, and you alluded to it before, Casey Cizikas is an Islander. During exit interviews, I sat for 3 hours and I heard everybody on the roster and Barry Trotz talk so glowingly and sing the praises of Casey Cizikas, where you really can't imagine him leaving. And I think he understands that, where sure, there's going to be a lot of interest in him, but in that same breath, wherever he goes, I don't think he's going to be able to succeed as much as he can on the island. And I think he knows that. I think his teammates know that. I think they understand what they have is sort of the outlier. So it's just a question of, does he think there are greener pastures on the other side of the fence? And to what you mentioned, Matt Martin tried it. It didn't work out too well.
But look at some of the other players that also went. Like Brassard, now the Islanders just didn't re-sign him, but Brassard went to Arizona. That wasn't great. But he, didn't have an Islander season that he did here, right?
That's a great point.
Grice, again, Detroit, but he wasn't, he was good here for a long time, even when the Islanders were not great. He still had pretty good numbers. He didn't fare very well. It wasn't like he was some star on this team, on a Detroit team that was terrible, and despite his record, he still had a pretty, numbers weren't good either. So you can there are a few of those guys that left the team for under their own power otherwise that didn't fare very well on the other side. Now, I don't think the mantra in the room is we're more than the sum of our parts. That would be pretty defeatist. I think they really do believe in themselves. But from the outside, I think it's pretty easy to say that. And if they're being really honest with themselves, and that, Joe, I think is what you're saying, is do I think I can have the same impact on another team where literally I think this team is the identity is not even just the line. I think it's Casey Zizekas. The way that he plays and motors around up there, I don't think it's the line. I think he made the line work. Those two players are not anything without him. That bottom six isn't anything without knowing that you can put out that fourth line at the end of games on penalty kills. He's way more valuable than any of the, I guess, the soft numbers as points and goals and all that kind of stuff. It's way, way more than that. That's where, I guess, the advanced stats come in. But no, I don't really think he's going anywhere. And I don't think it would be defeatist and negative for him to think I have the best chance to win here. I enjoy this team. I'm valued beyond the dollars and cents of it all. You're going to go to another team, like, I don't know. You can't even say like, oh, go to Toronto or something like where he's from, because who the hell knows what's going on over there?
It really would.
They don't even know what's going on over there.
It really would. So that's something that I keep thinking about is, would he want to go to Toronto? Because one, that's where he's from, but two, Toronto surely does want someone like Casey Zizekas, because they're another team.
A joke. Like,
no, well, here's the thing. They're another team, like Joe said, who's trying to win on skill alone, and it's just not working out for them. So someone like Casey Zizekas, who brings that grit and that bottom six force that you need in the bottom six, that for Toronto, to them, they're like, hell yeah, we need that. But again, like Joe and I said, Matt Martin's been there. Matt Martin's been there and done that. I can't see a situation where that happens. And Matt Martin doesn't say to him, dude, that was the worst decision I've ever made.
I think what isn't spoken about enough. And I'm not going to go into specifics, but I think that Casey Zizekas obviously has a lot invested in the Islanders. Given how long he's been there, the ups and downs he's seen with the organization, and now that finally they are on the ascension, there's an obvious desire to want to see that through. And I will only mention this, and this is more speculation on my part, but I think that Zizekas might feel that there's a certain debt of gratitude owed to the Islanders, because there were some difficult times during the pre-draft process where Zizekas was a first-round pick and things happened off the ice and he plummeted, and the Islanders took that chance on him. And I think that isn't worth nothing, So that's another aspect. And there's also the fact that this is a guy who's basically been canonized here on Long Island, where he is a absolute fan favorite, where how many places do you go around the National Hockey League where your fourth line center is amongst your most popular players? Right. That's worth something too.
Yeah, definitely agree. And a lot of the question marks out there is he going to do what's best for his family? And I think, whether or not he takes more dollars or he wants to take more dollars somewhere else, I think he might know in the back of his mind what's best for his family is to remain an Islander, keep his home on Long Island and stay there and raise his family there, because, again, Long Island's a great place to live and raise a family. And it can't be stated. It's been stated so many times by other players that it's just a great place to be. So with the way that the group is, how tight they are, and his best friend plays here, and the fact that he was gone and he came back, I don't see a world where Casey Zizekas is not an Islander still. However, it's a possibility. And that being said, what are the alternatives if he does not return, Mr. Joe Pantorno?
You have to err on the side of reality here, where if Zizekas does go, there are guys like David Krejci who are out there. The Islanders can go and get a guy like that. No. Really, there's one name that kind of sticks out to me on the free agent market this offseason, and He has experience playing in big games. He's around the same age as Cizikas. He plays a similar type of game, and he's done it in New York. That's Derek Stepan. A high character guy, a glue guy in the locker room. I've seen it firsthand. I covered the Rangers for a while earlier, almost a half decade ago. I covered the Rangers for a while, and Stepan's last few seasons with the Rangers, and when he went out to Arizona. At least from my experiences with him and with speaking with him, that is somebody who could assimilate quickly into the Islanders locker room and into the Islanders culture and produce a pretty similar game to Casey Cizikas. Should, again, the unthinkable happen, and he goes.
That's a pretty nice off-the-board selection. John, I have a feeling like I know who you're going to say replaces Casey Cizikas. You've mentioned him before, but I'll be surprised if you don't say him. Who replaces...
I don't remember who you're talking about. I want to believe that it could be a UFA, but I don't. I think it's an internal pick. Oh, I know what you're gonna say. Yeah. So I think Cole Bardreau is a UFA or an RFA. So I don't. He might not be retained unless it's on an AHA a two-way deal. So
Cole Bardreau is a UFA.
So he may not be back. It's possible he's not back. So yes, I think that's. That makes the most sense to me. He's Casey Cizikas light. I think maybe that's ideal internally for me, probably because he's really cheap. If you are going to bring him back, league min, if you promise him the spot, you do a backflip for sure. But or even $1 million. I mean, I think that's a savings for the Islanders. So and he'll be more than grateful for that. But Komarov can also be there. Koivula can also be there. Guys already on the books. That's my Stepan's a good choice. That's definitely a good off the board pick. I definitely would not have thought about that. Although, like I said, I didn't think about anybody outside the organization. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Right.
I think if they're going to save money, if it happens and they can't, they're like, okay, great. We're just not spending that money then. We're going to spend it somewhere else. We're going to give it to our guys. We're going to, I really don't think they're going to go out and do that.
That would make sense. That makes sense.
But yeah, so it won't be Cole Bardreau, because if it was, they would have figured that out already and just kind of like made it happen. But yeah, I almost want to believe it's just Komarov. Because it's a penalty kill guy. He's already locked up. He's got another year left. You kick the can down the road a year. You deal with it. Opens up a spot in the third line. You don't have to worry about him. He's just there. He's on the roster. A limited role. Fans are a little happier. Still get your guy, your veteran guy in the lineup, agitator. I don't know. I don't see it another way. If Cizikas is not back, it's Komarov.
I could see it being Komarov, a guy who had 14 hits in one game this postseason. So he certainly fits the mold. But I also wouldn't put it past, Trotz having a guy like Otto Koivula on the fourth line, who, if he's not picked up in the Seattle expansion draft, he seems poised and ready to take the next step.
Is he a fourth line guy? Like that?
I think he's a bottom six guy.
Yeah, but like he's a third line center or winger that is not going to have room on this team. Which, maybe to your point, that's part of a deal with to take Ladd and
could be
and Koivula in Seattle, which. I didn't want to like speculate on that stuff because I think it's other than like I think Eletti's a good choice in the take and kind of lean on that, or Eberle or something. There's a million opportunities there. I don't. Right, I feel like he's wasted talent, and the Islanders have done that before. Niederreiter, and just kept a guy there that just wasn't going to get any points. He's going to get frustrated. He's just going to keep sinking.
Right.
He's just not going to have an opportunity, and it's going to suck for everybody.
Fans
are going to wonder what the hell's going on with this guy. The manager's not going to like it. You got to make a trade anyway. I want to believe it too, but I just on that line, I don't see it.
So I don't know what the organization's thoughts are on Koivula as far as what his upside could be. If he's going to be a bottom six guy, a middle six guy. I don't think he's going to be a top six guy. But he did shift from wing to center. They did try to establish him as a center. And, you know, we have another guy on the roster, Michael Dow Cole, who recreated himself to fit on an NHL roster and play somewhat consecutively on a nightly basis. Joe, any thoughts on what the organization might want to do with an Otto Koivula if he sticks around?
That's a great question. And it's funny that John mentioned Nino Niederreiter, because that is really the first comp that comes to mind when I try to describe Otto Koivula. I'm with you where I don't think he has the metal to his game to be a fourth line center. I just don't see that happening. I don't think he has the prowess within the faceoff circle to really be relied upon too as that kind of guy where he has to play that two-way hockey. He certainly has the size. Also, just haven't watched enough of him on, say, the defensive end of the ice to see if he could fit in well. I do think that he is more of a, I don't want to use the word consolation, but he's more of a pot sweetener should the Islanders explore the trade market. I think that's the best value right now. And if he does go out and has a Niederreiter-like career, well, you know what? It is what it is. I don't think it would hurt the organization nearly as much as when Niederreiter actually left. But, you know, it's time to make some tough choices, and you can't hold on to these guys until they have no value. So it's something to seriously consider. Again, unless they really see him being a Kyle Palmieri replacement on the wing, you know, who knows? But
if they believed that he could be a center on this team, they don't go out and get Peugeot.
I agree.
They believed he was a third line center on this team.
I agree with
that.
They
don't get him and sign him to 6 years. There's no room for this guy.
Right.
And you can't keep him in the A forever. Potential turns into, I don't want to say failure. Potential turns into needed rebirth in the future, a la Michael Dow Cole. Or just doesn't work. I always have had plenty of those guys.
Can I play devil's advocate for a second?
Sure.
And this is not what I think. I just want to gauge the room here. Say Cizikas doesn't come back.
I don't like it already.
I know you don't. I know you don't.
I was hoping you had a pause there. I was like, I'm gonna jump in.
Say Cizikas doesn't come back. Has Joe on the fourth line and they put Koivula on the third line. Right?
Yeah.
I know.
I don't like that at all.
If there is an in-house option who's shown that he could probably seamlessly step in and play a fourth line role, Jean-Gabriel Pageau can play any type of hockey that you want him to play. Do you want him to be that grinder?
No, you want the 20 goals.
Absolutely.
Well, no, you want him to be the Apple guy to Palmieri or to Wallstrom or
that's a great point.
And that's what we said. That's what Jay and I said, and you were here for enough of these. When Pageau earlier this past season, which is really hard to get everything straight at this point. When Pageau first got on the team, and then earlier in this past season, that third line was a black hole. You're wasting the talent there with him. He can score and rack up points. He was in the top 5 in scoring on the team in the playoffs, right? He had a ton of, he had 10, 11 assists in 19 games. And I think, honestly, if Wallstrom was in the lineup, I think if they took that risk, I think this team fares a little bit better. We may be still talking about a much different series going on right now. We're having this conversation about all this stuff the week that it's all happening instead of the week before it's all happening. So no, I don't know that I think you go with it. If you're gonna do that, an internal replacement, it can't be him.
Oh, I agree. I'm not saying that is
a
legitimate option. I just like to throw in a wrench here and there and watch everybody freak out for a second. So it's fun.
All right. Andy Green. John, I know you have thoughts on Andy Green. Why don't you start us off with what you think about what could happen with Andy Green?
He's played really well for this team. And I think if you're going to have him as a part-time guy to introduce a rookie next year, either to play alongside him at times or in place of him, I think it's fine. The issue is that he's going to cost you money whether he's there or not. So the $700,000 is not breaking the bank. It's a $2 million.
Yeah.
So you may as well have him come back at essentially 2.7, which is to think that he's going to cost the Islanders close to half, whether he's there or not, of Pulock is nauseating.
Yeah.
Nauseating.
It's tough.
And I think he came in and did a really good job last season. I know you were a huge fan, Jay. He missed one game this year, and that was to rest him on purpose. He was not injured.
Yeah, game 80.
Then he played
56.
Yeah, so he played 55, 56, and then 19 playoff games. I don't know that you just keeps like Lightning just doesn't. Oh, they're about to win the Stanley Cup twice in a row. So Lightning strikes twice if you're the Tampa Bay Lightning. But with a singular player, I don't know that you can roll a dice on him at 39. Like he's not a Chara, right? Like if you're gonna let Letty go, you need something else. Now I don't know what that is, and you can't. There's no money, so you're stuck with Green for another year. Like I don't think you have a choice.
The thing is the $2 million is being spent no matter what. So if you're going to spend league minimum on a guy and Andy Green wants to come back, and if he's a seventh defenzment, so be it. You're gonna that money's gonna
sucks.
But that money's gonna go
and he's
somewhere.
not even playing. Yeah, like it's that's what I'm saying. It just sucks regardless because you're gonna spend, like I said, either just shy of half or more than half of what you're spending on Pulock, or what we're talking about. Like we're sitting here going like, oh, Pellick for 5.5 is expensive, and you're like, well, shit, we're gonna be spending half of that on Green as a seventh defenseman. Like, oh god,
yeah.
This is why when people question Lou Lamoriello winning GM of the year, you can win the Stanley Cup, but you're like, yeah, but this is a fucking headache. Like the cap is like all this like. Someone's going to find something. As I've said before, two things can be true. He can win a Stanley Cup and be a shitty GM also.
I mean, sure, great, but those tears...
Or have shitty qualities.
Those tears are going to stroll down your face, off your chin, and land in the actual cup of the Stanley Cup. So
I'm not going to say
shit at that point, right?
I'm not saying... I can not... I'll rephrase if it wasn't clear. Somebody will say it. I will not say it.
No, right.
Somebody else will say it. I will not be writing that article.
Yeah.
That benefits nobody.
Yeah.
No Islander fan is going to sit there the day after they win the cup and be like, "Well, they really screwed up signing bonuses because Andy." Like that's not going to happen.
Are you sure there will be no Islanders fans on that hellscape of a website that would do that? Because
no one that we care about.
Aha. Okay. All right.
There's plenty of people that can start any kind of dopey. We are those people. We started a dopey thing.
We did.
I like to think we're half decent. I don't think we try to actually analyze and do stuff like that and not editorialize.
What do we know? Who are we?
Yeah, who are we? Different. That's a different podcast.
So I want to be very specific when I ask this question. Internal alternatives to Andy Green if he does not return. Joe, what do you think?
The list is limited.
Very.
Right? I mean, it's Sebastian Aho. You bring back Thomas Hickey. He's there.
He is.
I mean,
he's another one that could go somewhere that still has something to prove in the tank at 2.5.
Sure.
If you can't move Komarov, and if you can move Hickey,
right? I think you want to see sooner rather than later what Bodie Wild has to offer. What Samuel Bolduc has to offer. Am I saying that they're ready to make the jump right now? I haven't watched them enough to say that.
I think Salo's closer, just from what I've read and seen.
Yeah, I think
he's definitely a Dobson guy. He's the next Dobson guy to step in the lineup as a homegrown player.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
But that's filling Letty, assuming he's not protected and he gets taken. He's taking the Letty spot, which is scary because then you need Green. And that's what I'm saying. Like you let Letty go, and it's all the stuff like just starts gaining momentum. Like, oh crap, what do we do? and all of a sudden you have 4 full-time NHLers and then a third pair of traffic cones.
I think also another name that doesn't get tossed around, who I think is lost within the shuffle of the Wild and the Bulldogs and the Sallows, Mitch Van de Sample. He is. I mean, I don't want to say he's an option, but he's 24. He got some pretty good looks at camp. I know a few years ago I was actually there when he went down with a season-ending leg injury or lower body injury, whatever you want to call it. But I remember taking note of how well he skated, how he, was a stride or two behind Nick Leddy. I mean, that's worth something. And again, I haven't seen him much since then, but there's another guy who's there. And again, another potential option where you can go down into your youth ranks and he's cheap and he's
right
at least worthy of potentially getting a look. So
I thought you were going to say Grant Hutton.
Yeah. I mean, listen, all these guys are, they've kind of been in the mix of the conversation where you see them at camp and you kind of take note of them and, okay, well, these guys are there. But really, I mean, the Bulldogs and the Wilds and the Van de Samples, I mean, those are the 3 youngsters who are here that I would say, could at least warrant the conversation. And
Sallow's here.
Sallow is here. Yeah.
But again, we're talking like I think there's potentially 2 spots open, and that's kind of the problem.
Yeah.
Or at least 1.5. If Green does come back, there's another half. So it could be 2 players internally. They're splitting time together. They're like Bellows and Wallstrom were, where
right.
Green is in the lineup every single night, much to my chagrin. And he proved me wrong. He played 70 games and was okay.
Yeah.
I wonder about Aho. Like eventually he's got to get a shot.
Yeah.
And now he's on a one-way deal this season.
You would think that again. I think in terms of the hierarchy of opportunities, I think Aho is at the very top of the list of internal candidates. And then that tier 2 is, the combination of Hickey if he's still around, and then you have the youngsters, the Wilds, the Bulldogs, the Van de Samples, the Sallows.
Aho's 25. It's not like he's
clock's ticking. Again, either you show you take this opportunity to showcase Sebastian Aho's value, or you sell him while there's still some intrigue in him. So
Dobson Green as a second pair. No, wait.
Third.
Dobson Green, Mayfield, Aho.
I could see a situation where Mayfield slid down to the third pairing to, essentially help a younger guy find his game in the NHL. So
Andy Green cannot be your second pair.
No.
Right.
No. Andy Green is the mentor. Andy Green is the mage where he is partnered up with the young and who is trying to cut his teeth in the NHL. So
I just don't think it'd be 2 righties on the second pair. Mayfield and Dobson are righties.
Well, then you got to break up the top pair. Then you got to break up Pelican Pulak,
which I don't think happens.
And I don't think I think that that's why.
So
at the end of the day, it may not. It may, as good of an argument as I can make for Leddy, at the end of the day, for the back end, it makes it way worse than it would be if you don't re-sign Palmieri. And that was my conclusion: is with or without him, Palmieri is not the make or break for this team on forward.
Yeah, consensus on Green is if he doesn't come back, the options internally are limited. Now, moving on to Palmieri, your top 6, let's say Eberle stays, is solidified. Lee, Barzal, Eberle, Bailey, Beauvillier, Nelson. Then your third line is question mark, JG Peugeot, and Oliver Wahlstrom. Do the Islanders look inside or outside of the organization for a replacement for Kyle Palmieri? First guy that comes to mind for me would be Kiefer Bellows. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Kiefer's number one here.
On
like
what line?
On the third
line, left wing.
where we saw it in brief stints, where Barry Trotz trusted JG Pageau to center that line of the youngsters. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's something that Barry Trotz wants to see going into next season. I think he wants to see a little bit more of a stabilizing factor. He wants 2/3 of that line to at least be stable and maybe have a little bit more of a veteran presence rather than dealing with Wahlstrom, who is, his calling card is offense. But again, he did a wonderful job of showing that he could play that two-way game.
And the power play.
And the power play, right. Bellows hasn't necessarily done that, and that's why we didn't see him down the stretch.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Can that veteran presence come in somebody who we have not spoken about in a long time? Anatoly Golishev.
Doesn't he need a contract too?
He's an RFA, but I can't see a situation where he signed with the Islanders to come over to the NHL and he's just not going to get anything further. So they're going to re-sign this guy.
It's a two-way or
right.
They don't have room for a 14th forward. So
whatever it may be, he's going to either play in Bridgeport or he's going to play on the Islanders this year. And I can't see a situation where he might not be I can't see a situation where he won't be on the Islanders roster this year because he's one of those guys who I feel where if he's not going to play in the NHL, he's going to go back to Russia. So I don't think they jump through these hoops to get him over here just to not play. And he is a winger. He did play on the top line over in the KHL. I believe he was centered by Pavel Datsyuk. And he's a goal scorer. He knows how to score goals. So is he a possible candidate for that third line? He's a veteran presence. He won I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he won a Garganian Cup. And he again, like I said, he's a sniper. So can he be that third line winger with Oliver Wahlstrom and JG Pageau?
Listen, again, it's an option, and it's one thing for a goaltender to make the jump from the KHL to the NHL and succeed, but I think we've seen a lot of these jumps from the KHL to the NHL with these apparent goal scorers, and they haven't necessarily worked out. So I think it would be difficult to have the Islanders throw all of their eggs in the proverbial basket in Golishev, especially when he hasn't really proven that he could do that yet in the NHL, for them to just say, okay, he's our guy on the third line, and that's that. What they have done, though, is set up the notion of an internal competition that would, well, it's at least what management is looking for, where you do have that competition kind of fueling guys and ensuring that they hear footsteps over their shoulders if they take a night off or they don't adhere to the system. So you can go into training camp and say, you know what? You go up to Golishev and you go up to Bellows and you say, third line spot's open. Who wants it?
We're saying that Eberle's there still, like he remains on the team. That with Palmieri's not there.
I think that's what James said. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't see a scenario that it's not Komarov, Pageau, Wahlstrom on that third line. Cizikas comes back. I don't think you essentially see Lee return. Komarov goes on to that third line. Again, you keep a good penalty killer or a penalty killer, you're, I guess, somewhat subjective. A decent penalty killer to play it down the middle with Cizikas, Pageau, you have Beauvillier, Brocknell. Like, you keep that intact. I don't see that not being the case. Like, I don't think there's room, and I think that's a little bit of the issue with this team is they brought on Dobson and Wahlstrom as rookies. There has not been new blood on the team in a real long time. Before that, what was it? Not in the Trotz era, at least. There have not been that many like mainstays that kind of came up and stuck.
Right.
They've been really selective, so they know what they have in Wahlstrom, and he's healthy now. And if Palmieri can't come back, he's obviously a good internal replacement, quote unquote internal replacement for that. I don't know. You stick with Komarov there. And you see if you have room at the deadline, you upgrade again. You figure it out. You see what your needs are and go from there. And if you take him out of the lineup at that point, it's not a big deal. I don't think there's room, which I think is a problem. I think that's where the Islanders, A, don't even have that good of a pipeline, and B, the pipeline they have, there's not really anywhere for them to go. So if Bellows doesn't get taken, what does he do? He's going to play in the A again?
So Michael Dal Cole is an RFA, due for a contract. He'll probably get one if in my opinion. Maybe it's qualifying offer, or maybe it's a few more dollars than what he makes now, but nothing substantial. Probably not much of a market out there for him anyway, so I don't see him not returning.
Someone will take him.
You think? Who? Why? For what reason? I don't dislike him as a player, but
in the Islanders system, it makes more sense than elsewhere. I don't know. I think somewhat like a Detroit still needs guys. Buffalo, Buffalo has nobody signed.
And maybe he gets a contract by default, but I think that
he's not going to go off. He's not going to need a rider.
No, not at all. But
it's still.
Is he not a viable third line replacement after we've been on the record saying he's pretty good there?
He could. I think whether it's him or Komarov, I see Komarov just sticking in the lineup. That's the problem. There's no need for both of them. If Lee is back and you have that everything else is set, like you're fielding the same roster again. There's nothing to change. Now, do I see them swapping him every once in a while? Sure. Komarov's getting there. 33, 4 years old. Give him a night off. Takes a dumb penalty, something. Sure. I could see it. If they let him walk or give him a two-way deal or something like that, so he's not a main roster player and the cap hit doesn't count, I could see that. Komarov, again, you sign Dal Cole to a 1-year deal, you keep Komarov for the next year, and then next year they're both gone. You have to clear that cap space eventually. You can't re-sign Dal Cole for 2 more years and lock up not only the spot on the roster, but the cap space when there just isn't that room. 700 a league min contract is a big deal this year for the Islanders. You can't just throw, and that's what I don't understand what they're going to do. Like there's going to be you're going to have a lot of negotiations. You might just straight up lose guys. If you do value Bellows, you're going to have to give him a better deal than maybe what he's worth to keep him. But then you're not going to have room for the Dal Coles.
Who do they value more? Do they value Kiefer Bellows over Michael Dal Cole? Because if you go off playing time and trust, it certainly appeared that the Islanders trusted Michael Dal Cole on the third line more than they did Kiefer Bellows.
Does it depend on what they think the future needs are of the team?
I mean, you would think
Dal Cole is replaceable.
Absolutely.
Bellows, that kind of skill, the potential anyway, is not.
100%. I think it's either league minimum 1-year deal for Dal Cole or bust, where I think there needs to be a realization that, this is a guy who is a 13th forward, who is a stopgap guy if injuries come in and they need him in a pinch. Because I don't think Michael Dal Cole can really prove much more. He's a system player. Again, he stays quiet when he's out there, which is a good thing. He doesn't hurt you, but he doesn't necessarily help you most nights.
If you unload Komarov this offseason, if all goes well, Lamoriello pulls it off. Ladd is gone, Komarov's gone, whatever you want to do. Obviously, Boychuk stays in LTR. That's nothing to say of whether or not Leddy stays or whatever. If Komarov leaves, I could see them. I mean, that leaves the door open for Palmieri, and in which case there's no room for Dal Cole anyway. So I can only see if they don't want to spend the cap space on that, and they'd rather keep Leddy and lose Palmieri, and even for another 1 more year, and they're able to unload Ladd and Komarov. It's the only way I can see Dal Cole finding a more permanent space, 60, 75 games, whatever the case is, in the lineup, is if they're going to just try to keep as much intact as possible and then you have to utilize him as a penalty killer as well. You have to be able to train him and have the confidence to do that. So if you're going to keep Eberle, you're going to keep Leddy, let Palmieri go, unload Ladd and Komarov, Dal Cole has a spot. Or it's a Golashev, Dal Cole, Bellows can all kind of go on that spot. And you have to Wallstrom's your guy on that third line with Peugeot. And you're literally just filling that left wing spot. I can't think of another scenario where Dal Cole gets a sniff.
I'm gonna loop these two guys together because in my mind they're in the same situation. Travis Zajac and Corey Schneider. Joe, are they back? Is one back? Are both gone? What's going on there?
Nah, both gone. There's no. I don't know. I mean, they're so far down on the list of priorities in terms of what the Islanders need and the funds that they can expend. I don't see either of them returning. There's really not much more I can say on it.
All right. So before we talk about any external possibilities, going into free agency, if the Islanders are even going to be in play at all, Arthur Staple put out an article, I believe it was today. July 6th. So yesterday, as you're hearing this, on what the Islanders offseason could look like, trades, veteran signings, and the Kraken expansion draft, and 3 scenarios that all had me feeling some feelings.
Yeah, I would say definitely had some feelings.
Definitely had some feelings. So we'll start with scenario number 1. And he titles it, "You want change? We got change." And your top 6 looks like Anders Lee, Matthew Barzal, and Vladimir Tarasenko. And the way he gets there is he trades Jordan Eberle and Anthony Beauvillier to the St. Louis Blues to acquire Vladimir Tarasenko and another player who needs a contract. He is an RFA, so you're essentially swapping RFAs in Vincent Dunn. Your second line looks like Josh Bailey on the left, Brock Nelson, and Oliver Wahlstrom. Welcome to the top 6. He then goes and signs Patrick Marleau for $1 million to play third line left wing with Jean-Gabriel Pageau, and Kyle Palmieri's back at $4.75 million per year. And then the fourth line sticks together as usual. You have your top pairing of Pelech and Pulak. Vincent Dunn, Vince Dunn, is on that second pairing with Scott Mayfield. And get this, Zdeno Chara with Noah Dobson with your goaltenders remaining, Varlamov and Sorokin. And he says, let's get one thing straight. It's hard to imagine Lou and Barry angling to upend their team because the chemistry in the locker room. But, guys, this this roster to me says, yeah, we're going to take on the Lightning and we're going to win. What do you guys think?
You want to crack at this first?
Joe, you go first.
I guess, because it was one of those things where it was just like, what?
It's a lot. It's a lot of wheeling and dealing here. So here's how he gets Ladd off the books. He gets Ladd off the books to Arizona with Kiefer Bellows and a second-round pick in 2022 attached. Nick Leddy is picked up by the Seattle Kraken, and Komarov is sent off packing to Edmonton with a 2022 second-round pick also attached, Colorado's. It's a lot to give up. It's a lot of maneuvering. He does get Ladd off the books. He gets Komarov and Leddy off the books. So you're adding 10, 11, 13 million. And you're spending that on Tarasenko, Marleau.
The Marleau thing is very weird for me. I don't know how,
I don't hate that as a third line.
I don't have good feelings about it.
I have great feelings about Vince Dunn being a second pairing defenseman, though, on the Islanders. He's a young, up and coming top 4 defenseman who I like very much. But nonetheless, this is a dream scenario. I would say this is much less likely to happen than scenario number 2.
Well, before we move on, if there was ever a time for the Islanders, if Chara is on the roster, if there's ever a time for the Islanders to go back to the Fishermen It is with the return of Zdeno Chara. 24 years, 25 seasons, whatever later. There was ever a time. When Chara's back in the roster.
What a time to like exercise some more demons while you're at it.
In UBS Arena.
Can you just imagine though, like
let's keep this in mind because Zdeno Chara is actually going to come up later in the show. We have a few more minutes left to go. But let's talk about version number 2, which is a simpler path. Lee, Barzal, and Eberle stick on the top line. Beauvillier signs for $4.25 million per year, and he sticks with Nelson and Josh Bailey. Anatoly Golishev, third line, left wing with JG Peugeot and Oliver Wahlstrom. Fourth line stays intact. Your top 6 defensemen stay intact. Andy Green signs for $750,000, which is, I think, the new league minimum, by the way. Ilya Sorokin signs for $2.75, and you have Johnny Boychuk and Andrew Ladd on LTIR, which essentially just gives you about $600,000. And then you have version number 3. Oh boy, this is the version where if everything goes wrong this offseason and nothing works itself out, you have Anders Lee on the top line with Matt Barzal and Alex Galchenyuk. Anthony Beauvillier with
heavy on the yuck.
Anthony Beauvillier with his usual suspects in Nelson and Bailey. Michael Dal-Cole, centered by Jean-Gabriel Peugeot and Wahlstrom on his opposite. Then you have Martin, Komarov, and Clutterbuck, like John said earlier. On defense, you have Pelech, who signs for $6 million per year. Ryan Pulock. Goligoski signs for $2.5 million per year, playing with Scott Mayfield. And you have Andy Green once again with Noah Dobson, Varlamov, and Sorokin.
God, Andy Green would be the third highest paid defenseman on the Islanders. Jesus.
He in fact would be the third highest paid.
Jesus,
this is the version where nothing, absolutely nothing goes right. I don't see version 3 happening. I don't think Lou Lamoriello will allow that. I don't see version 1 happening as much as we might all really, really, really want that to happen. But version 2 seems much more realistic to me. Your top 6 remains intact. Your bottom 6 pretty much remains the same. I don't dislike Anatoly Golishev playing third line left wing. And the great thing here is, Pelech only makes $400,000 more than Pulock. Leddy remains, and Andy Green sticks around for one more year. And I don't dislike 2.75 for Ilya Sorokin. That's a 2-year deal.
I'll say that if I had to take a guess on what Trotz and Lamoriello are willing to roll the dice on, it's for sure the third line left winger and not randos on defense. I think a priority for them would be to, just as much as maintain the forward group, I think a little bit more would be to maintain that defensive group if they can do it, which means Palmieri is just not an option. Just on the dollars and cents of it, not because they don't want it. So I think they're much more willing to roll the dice on Golishev, who can be replaced with anybody in the A if they're having a good year, or Bellows steps up, or they can make a trade, or whatever they can figure out. That's much more replaceable than someone in your top 4.
Yeah.
And, if Andy Green goes down or something, you do have an Aho around.
Yeah.
You do have a Salo around. So I think that leaves the defenseman with a lot more wiggle room maintaining Nick Leddy and maybe giving some of those guys another year to marinate, knowing that Leddy and Komarov and Clutterbuck, or even if Clutterbuck's back, it'll be a lower, a lot more room on salaries coming off next year to then make, really maybe have that first case scenario where you can bring on some guys. And Tarasenko's a UFA, I believe. After
got 2 years left on this deal.
So or maybe it's a next season thing. So that seems more likely, if only from literally that one thing. That's what sticks out to me. That's a much easier thing where you can double shift guys. You can double shift Beauvillier. You can double shift Bailey. Eberle here and there if you don't like, Golishev's game or you're just trying to shield him a little bit. That's a lot easier for them to swallow than trying to figure out the defense.
Yeah, so just to clarify, for the way Staple kept the core pretty much intact, he did deal a second-round pick in 2022 to the Seattle Kraken, at least, for them to choose Otto Koivula. So Koivula is out of the situation on Long Island, and you have essentially the same roster coming back, insert Anatoly Golishev. And to me, like Joe said earlier, I think that's probably the most realistic situation you're going to find this offseason regarding the expansion draft and what the roster is going to look like next season. I do see a deal coming for the Kraken or with the Kraken so that, Lou kind of gets his way in saying, pick this guy or else, because that's the Lou Lamoriello way. But any final thoughts on this article, Joe, John?
Scenario number 2 is the most likely. Expect to see the Islanders just come in with the same mindset of we're running it back with most of the usual suspects. And I think that is the top priority of this offseason, is just to retain as much as they can of that core that they can. As much as you want to dream about Vladimir Tarasenko, if I were a betting man, and I'm not, no, don't count on it.
So, and who knows? Maybe Anatoly Golishev shocks us all and becomes a consistent 20-goal scorer on that third line, like he was in the KHL. But that leads us to external UFAs, and I was just curious on what your thoughts might be on the Islanders potentially signing a top-line winger, something discussed forever with this team. John, we'll start with you. Is there any way the Islanders go out into UFA or into the offseason? We just saw what Staple did in getting Vladimir Tarasenko playing around with Cap Friendly, doing the armchair GM feature on the website. Is there a way for the Islanders to bring in a top line or a scoring threat in any capacity?
It's funny that article came out today because I had thoughts on this beforehand. And I don't know that it's a matter of if it can happen, can they make it fit? I just don't think it's going to happen. That's not what Lou does. That's not what this team has done in the past 3 years. It's not about, yes, was Palmieri the best player available? Yes. Did he also fit what the team needed as far as chemistry in the locker room and all that other stuff? Also, yes. I'd argue that that's more important. And I don't think adding a guy like Tarasenko, does it help? Of course it does. No one is going to deny that. In my article, Palmieri, I say the same thing. Of course, keeping him is good. It's not the make or break thing. Is Tarasenko a game breaker? Absolutely. Could the Islanders still benefit from that? Yes. You're not going to get an argument from me. I would totally back it if it happens. I just don't see it. I don't see this team. I don't see Lou giving up the assets that you need. I don't think you give up on Beauvillier. You can't compare him to Tarasenko, obviously. But the team is more than the sum of its parts. They're more interested in maintaining the chemistry here than doing that. I just don't think it's not possible because it's Lou, not because they can't make it work. Of course, he can make anything work. They'll figure it out. But I just think it's this pipe dream. We just keep talking about it for years. You and I were on it last summer. It could be Hoffman. It could be this. And eventually we came to the conclusion it's not about who's the best goal scorer available. It's who fits the mold. Who is the Islanders' most ideal player to get? Not who is the best player and getting Ovechkin and all these. I just don't think that's something that this team is going to do under this regime and this makeup of the team. If things blow up in the future and you can't, you throw things at the wall at that point, things are blowing up. What do you have to lose? You can't compare one team to the next if a whole bunch of stuff falls apart from underneath you.
Right, and that's why that's why version 1 in his article is the least likely to happen, because time and time again, management has spoken about keeping the core together, the chemistry in the locker room. And if you make all those changes, that could quickly fall apart. So we've all said, and Joe said, that the nature of the NHL might be changing a little bit, and where you can have a bunch of middle six guys playing throughout the roster and not have that top end scoring, as long as your structure is good. And we're seeing that now with the Islanders. So
I think it's opportunity too.
Right.
Look at Vegas. It's clearly about team makeup. It's about giving guys opportunity. I think you're right with Golishev. What do you have to lose at $1 million?
Right.
So you bury him, and you give him a 1-year deal. Look, you're going to be on the roster. It messes up. You got guys in the wings. It's not like you can't give Bells a shot. It's not like you don't have other players that you can use as motivation. You've seen, Zarnak was not great, but he's a third line guy. Right. He is at that point when you have Pajot and Wallstrom, you need Guy. Don't fuck it up. That's all you need. You need to just go up to him and take him by the head and be like, don't fuck it up.
Can Guy score 40 goals?
No, he doesn't need to score. He doesn't need to score 40 goals.
No, I know.
It goes back to that quote from Trotz. Like, if we had won 1-0 and didn't lose 1-0, you're not saying we need more offense.
Right.
You're saying what a good job on defense.
Yeah.
This team is. Would I do a backflip if they got Tarasenko and kept this forward and defensive group in somewhat the same shape somehow? Yeah, you bet your ass. I'll buy a jersey, but it's just not. It's just not. Maybe I'll eat crow on this too.
Does he wear 91?
Don't see it.
Does he wear 91?
And numbers
he can't, right? He can't, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you rewrite it, maybe on purpose.
Joe, for you, any UFAs in mind that are possibilities for the Islanders? I know you shed some light on what you think if Cizikas leaves, maybe Derek Stepan comes in. Any other names, in your sights that is a possibility to come to the New York Islanders?
No, and just because of the fact that when we spoke with Lou Lamoriello last week, it was the same message of we want to do everything we can to keep our team together, and that's that. I mean, that's. Who knows if he puts all of his eggs in that basket or if he goes down with that ship, and if it doesn't happen, then suddenly you are faced with scenario number 3 in Staples' article. But in that same aspect, I think it's a different time in terms of guys want to stay here. Guys want to be here. And who knows? You know what? You might have guys knocking on the door. You might have Chara's representation go to the Islanders and say, hey, a year.
It's possible.
You might have Patty Marleau's agent knocking on the Islanders' door. Hey, my guy wants to win a cup. 1 year, $1 million. Sure. Sure.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That's not a player. If it was like after what Jason Spezza has done, yeah, okay. I'm about that. Marleau, no, thank you. That, you know what that reminds me of, and I saw this player pop up in it was the Islanders Legends. Shout out Islanders Legends Twitter account that just started very recently. They posted a picture of Brian Rolston. That's a 2010 9-11. Patrick Marleau is that era Islander pickup in the offseason. And we would have been like, "Oh my God, look!"
Put some respect on Patrick Marleau's name.
I'm not this past respect, not future respect. This is not the same. He's 41 to whatever years old.
You're right.
That's a pick. That's a Garth Snow 2010 pickup. 100%.
That's 4 goals and 5 assists in 56 games last year.
That's well said.
That's all you need to say.
Yeah, that's a different era of hockey, of Islanders. That's some Arizona shit.
That's
not Islanders hockey. That's not Islanders right now.
That's the Islanders hockey that I think all 3 of us grew up with.
That maybe in our adult life, absolutely, and that's why I say that.
I have a question, Joe.
He's just ignoring me right off the bat. This is a good sign.
Last week, rumor came through via the fourth period on Vladimir Tarasenko, but also on Phil Kessel. Is there a fit for Phil Kessel on the New York Islanders?
Holy shit! I'm gonna throw
Joe,
up.
John, just mute now, John.
I just need to. I don't know. Don't unmute. I'd rather hear. I think I'd rather hear John kind of huff and puff throughout all this. Listen, what did Phil Kessel do last year?
Nothing.
56 games, 20 goals, 23 assists.
It's not nothing.
That's true.
Would you take that on your third line?
I didn't know he did that much. I thought he did less, but okay, that's a quiet season for him.
Think of it. He did that on the Arizona Coyotes. Now,
okay, think
of what he could potentially do next to JG Pajot.
Oh boy, I'm starting to get excited.
I can hear John Zella's eye roll from here.
I know. 300 miles away. The same spiel about earlier about just picking up players. He's not he's not a member of the chemistry of this team.
Correct. That's
starting the end of it.
100%.
That's the biggest point.
And I think that's I have nothing else. I don't have a whole lot other to say. There are a lot of players that would be good on this team potentially. And I guess end of sentence. There's a lot of players that'd be good playing next to Barzal, next to Pajot, setting up Wallstrom. Yeah, of course.
I'd be better.
But I think they're very selective. I think it's not just the best player available. That there's a Venn diagram for the Islanders and how they choose players. There's a reason why Lamoriello is picking guys that he knows what their character is, and he's kind of putting it together like the way that he is. Phil Kessel, I don't know that's remotely. I don't even know what his contract is. Is he UFA this year or something? I don't even know. I don't think so, but he's probably too expensive. You'd have to give stuff up that you super don't want to give up. It wasn't 20 goals. That wasn't the difference this year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
They have a consistency issue. That's a whole different problem. That's just the guys on the ice. That's just them showing up every night. We've seen it as good as the Islanders have been. That's been a problem. That's a between the years shit. That is not on the ice. Phil Kessel's going to solve that problem. Bullshit.
There's two things I want to say. He is signed through next season. He has a base salary of $1 million. Problem is, he has a $5 million signing bonus.
Each summer?
What?
Each summer?
Yeah. So last year he had a $5 million signing bonus. This year he has a $5 million signing bonus.
That was paid already, wasn't it?
I meant 2020-21 season, he had a $5 million signing bonus. And then for 2021-22, he has a $5 million signing bonus.
Right.
But it goes against that cap each year.
Okay.
So that there's one thing which obviously it will never happen. And again, I'm going to bring up a stat that will make people groan and moan and yell and whatever. Phil Kessel's plus minus is not good. It was minus 17 last year. I think he has, I don't know, forgive me if I'm wrong here. He has something along the lines of like a minus 134 career plus minus.
Gross.
Where of his, 16 or 15 NHL seasons, he's only had a plus rating 3 times.
That would make Nicoletti blush.
Right. So I personally sometimes still take stock into plus minus. It just means that good things happen more often or less often when you're on the ice. That's worth something, especially for a team like the Islanders. Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of guys are going to be interested in the Islanders now that they were 2 games within a Stanley Cup appearance and now 1 game within a Stanley Cup appearance. So
right.
2 goals, not even a game.
1
2
goal.
goals.
Well, okay, 2 goals, yeah.
Sure. So
And that's a great point. I think a lot of Long Island's now a destination, right? Belmont's now here. It's happening. I don't think that the Islanders are ever going back to Nassau Coliseum. So if you're listening to this thinking about maybe they'll play one or two more games, it's not going to happen. Sorry guys, not even preseason. It's going to Bridgeport. They might even play a game or two in Bridgeport for the regular season. Who knows? But
they're going to be on the road,
right?
At maybe closer to 10 games to start the season,
right?
And West Coast thing, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
They'll play locally, and then they'll
all done.
Whatever.
Correct. But the point is that Belmont is now here. Long Island's now a destination with the two conference finals appearances that close to the Stanley Cup. Players are going to want to come here, and I can't stop thinking about the possibility. And here we go again of Zdeno Chara coming back to the Islanders. And not like he's coming back, from his glory days and he's returning again, but he was an Islander at one point, and he did so well with Washington, and I can't help but think he'd be that much better in the Islanders system, and no less paired with Noah Dobson. Yeah, Andy Green can still come back. That's great, and even though he's already getting paid his $2 million this year, he'll probably sign a league min contract, and I could see Andy Green being a seventh defenseman. I could see Zdeno Chara playing with Noah Dobson as the sixth defenseman, and maybe he splits time with Andy Green. But he played so well with Washington. I think that the structure on Long Island with under Barry Trotz is that much more suited to Zdeno Chara's game. I don't know. I think he might, if he wants to win one more. Do you not do that, Joe? Do you not do that if he wants to win one more?
I mean, if you're Chara, yeah, you try.
No.
If
you're the Islanders,
I don't know. I honestly, I don't know if that's.
He says
that's
to you,
your
"I
answer.
make money. Give me a league min contract. I want to win with you guys."
I honestly, I don't know. All I remember is him getting walked by Barzal this year.
But that's Matthew Barzal. He's going to play.
I hate to tell you, other teams have better players than Matt Barzal.
But he's playing
in the division.
He's playing third pairing. Most of the time, he's not going to be on the ice against Matthew Barzal.
Yeah, they try to do that with Dobson too. He's also gotten walked and has been in limited minutes.
Joe, you're grinning.
You can't have a third. You can't have a third line of two guys you need to shelter.
No, I don't.
Green was out there a little bit more than Dobson, if I'm not mistaken. Dobson was the guy that he was the sixth guy, especially in during the Tampa Bay series. I don't know that you can have both of them have to get sheltered minutes. I understand the veteran presence thing, and he's a captain and all that kind of stuff. I have a hard time disagreeing with you there. If it happens, I'm in support of it. I'm not going to just poo-poo it, the whole season, unless he starts to play really badly. But I don't know if that's your answer, but we've been very wrong with the choices made by Lamoriello. So
So just for reference, Andy Green's time on ice this year, average time on ice, was 17 minutes and 35 seconds. Chara's with Washington was 18 minutes and 19 seconds.
Yeah, I think.
Joe, what are your thoughts?
Man. Yeah. I don't know.
He wasn't prepared for this.
This was a stressful episode for you both. Man.
Yeah, this is a tough episode.
This is and that's the thing. The first episode of the offseason is always like this, where you're not sure what direction everybody's going. So everything is on the table. Zdeno Chara is 44 years old. I mean, I get it. And Andy Green is like a spring chicken compared to him. But like you said, Chara did play more minutes. Chara has, I don't even want to talk about experience. I don't want to talk about winning a cup. I don't want to talk about that. He's 44. He's massive.
He could, I think it's the system thing. I think what could save him being there
Right.
The only thing is the system and being utilized.
Or,
maybe not every single night. Maybe it's him and Aho, something like.
Right.
I mean, Green was in there every night, so the hell do I know?
You put that slap shot out there on the point, even if it's 44 years old and it's more of a threat than Andy Green's. And
it sounds like we're all saying the same thing.
I mean, you can.
It's a toughness factor, like that raises again, but like I feel like that's 10 years ago. Us having that conversation where you're like Andy Sutton, yay, and you're like, no, stop this. We don't need Eric Cairns. Andy Sutton's Eric Cairns 2.0. We don't need that again. That's not what this team is.
I mean, if you could, in an ideal world, like I'd bring in Andy Green and I would bring in Chara and just let him have at it. There's one spot. Who wants it? Like
41 games apiece, maybe.
Sure, that's an option too. I mean, it's.
Chara would have to come in though,
the idea of Chara coming back, I'm like, that's just asinine to me.
Well, if he did come back, he and Matt Martin would have to shake hands and put aside their differences because who remembers that photo of Matt Martin looking like he was staring down the barrel of a gun? Essentially, that was terrifying.
And on the floor in fetal position. Yes.
But I think
he does add that. I think there's. A lot of other teams have done this. I mean, you got to look at. I mean, it didn't work in Toronto, but Tampa's doing it. They have guys like Pat Maroon. They have kind of these bigger guys that just make your life miserable. And Mayfield kind of does that. If you add Chara, is that?
Well, could you imagine
doubling your money?
Mayfield and Chara on the ice and the fourth line being out there? Nobody's pushing the Islanders around. They're already not pushing the Islanders around.
Right.
Chara to that mix.
If somehow Komarov's still floating around, it's a
tough team.
It's a physically tough team. I just wonder if I think the system could make Chara better if Chara adapts to the system well enough. And I don't know if that's a roll of the dice that they're willing to. It is a very Lamoriello move. I'll say that much. But
guys, Jaromir Jagr's 49 years old. Let's give him a call too. We're at it.
All right, now we're having a conversation.
Oh, stop!
I mean, it was a long time ago now, but he was pretty good in that series against the Islanders in 2016.
All right,
5
years.
Who's not
good? Who's not good against the Islanders historically? Let's stop the conversation right there. All right, so I think that about wraps it up for our UFA free agency expansion draft discussion. Mercifully, let's quickly wrap up the show with Around the Rink and the Stanley Cup Final. Stayed alive 2 nights ago as Josh Anderson scored the overtime winning goal in Montreal. Very Islanders-esque win, if I don't say so myself. It was a very grindy goal, and the way that Josh Anderson scored was he was on his behind after the puck was in the back of the net. But game 5 tonight as you're hearing this, so suit up for the possibility of Tampa Bay winning in their home arena. I don't think they lost that game on purpose, by the way. Many people were saying they should throw it to win on home ice. I don't think any team ever says that because
I think the mayor of Tampa said that.
The mayor of Tampa did say that. You don't ever want to give any team the momentum to mount the comeback because this is the NHL and these are all professional hockey players.
Did you speaking of this series, did you see that Suzuki pass to the first Anderson goal?
Yes.
A stupid pass.
He's a talented guy.
Incredible.
And that was was that on Sergachev? There's a defenseman I'm like trying to watch the replay. Whoever
it might have been on Chernak. I think it was on Chernak.
Yeah. Whatever. Some dude is just like, or Savard, just like, dude is just laid out. All the patience in the world, Suzuki. And
yeah, you have to wonder if Vegas is kicking themselves because they could have really used a number 1 centerman like Nick Suzuki this postseason run. But game 5 tonight of the Stanley Cup Final, Tampa Bay could close it out at home, claiming their second cup in consecutive years. last thing we want to say, unfortunately, we learned of Matis Kivlenieks. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Kivlenieks or something like that.
So Matisse Kivlenieks, goaltender for the Columbus Blue Jackets, unfortunately passed away a couple of nights ago. Freak accident, freak injury. Was struck with a firework, and he suffered some sort of chest contusion, and unfortunately passed away. So we just want to reach out to any Columbus fans who might be listening to this, and give our condolences to them, the family of Matisse Kivlenieks, the Columbus Blue Jackets organization. Just a tragic situation, and we couldn't be more sorry for the loss in Columbus, and I believe Latvia, right? He's Latvian.
Yes.
So our deepest condolences to all that cared for Matisse. We are sorry for your loss. But that's going to wrap it up for us this week. We want to thank the Hockey Podcast Network, the Hockey Writers, and of course, all of you, our listeners. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to or watch the show. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as YouTube at Nasserman Hockey, and find our work at the Hockey Writers. You can find Joe at Joe Pantorno on Twitter, and for a wide variety of sports coverage, including the Islanders, at amnewyork.com. Until next time, everybody, let's go Islanders.